During an evening dissection at medical school in 1803, Pendleton wiped the bloodied scalpel against his leather apron. He and his instructor Hawthorne were slicing the chest of a cadaver stolen from a nearby graveyard. "All right, this is the location of the heart and the arteries," Hawthorne said while pointing to the chest. "We must use a bone saw to get at them." A shouting crowd interrupted before they could crack the ribs. "Show your face, you coward," they said. "You ain't stealing no more bodies from the grave." Pendleton hinted to Hawthorne that he wanted to address the crowd. He walked over to the windowsill and peered out at them. At first glance, they carried pitchforks and torches like a typical 19th century mob. Looking closer, he noticed they wore muddy formal clothes. Their faces were decayed at different degrees of severity. Some had pale skin ripe for putrefaction. Others had completely rotted noses or lips. "Look at these people," Pendleton told Hawthorne, who had joined him by the windowsill. "They don't look alive." A distinguished man who was the leader of the undead crowd stepped forward. His face was decayed to the point where his flesh was bluish-brown. He wore a tricorn hat and kerchief above a waistcoat. "You fellas up there," he said to them, "I want to proclaim that you have taken too many corpses from our graveyard." At first, Pendleton didn't know what to say down to the leader. But then he thought of something sensible. "Yes, we did take perhaps 2 or 3 corpses, sir," he said. "But we did it in good faith, to help man further his understanding of anatomy." The leader didn't like the excuse. The undead crowd became more inflamed. "We don't care what you proclaim," the leader said. "We had our weekly graveyard resident soul gathering and decided enough was enough." He raised his trembling index finger, shaming Pendleton. It was bluish-brown like his face. "How about we give you a dissection so you can make your own contribution to the study of human anatomy?" Pendleton panicked. "What shall we do?" he asked. "Maybe we should block the doors with old furnishings if they tried to attack us." Hawthorne wasn't afraid of the mob. "Don't worry about the dead outside," he said. "Don't worry about a mob of undead creatures, you say?" "Yes, they're merely trying to intimidate us. Ever since I first stole cadavers from the grave 12 years ago, they've been threatening me. First they came in small groups, then in large numbers. Later, they came with battle swords and said they would decapitate me in my sleep." "So, you mean this is all to scare us?" Hawthorne nodded. "All you see are spirits." He then pointed beyond the undead. "Look over there, at that street sweeper beside the lamppost. He continues to work because he doesn't see them." Pendleton was relieved. I was 19 years old the first time I branded a live human. My father is a meticulously talented metal fabricator. He is also one of the craziest, most fascinating and intelligent people I know. So when he called me one Saturday afternoon and said he had handcrafted a brand and trusted his one and only daughter to do the deed, I was in. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity I just couldn't pass up. How many people do you know that can say, "I branded my dad"? Now, I have to admit, I was definitely apprehensive at first. There's a lot of pressure involved with being responsible for pressing a scorching red, hot piece of sharp metal against someone's skin, which will leave a permanent mark on their body for the rest of their life. We cracked a few beers and took a few shots with my best friend and a few of his roommates while the brand rested in the flaming coals. It took about an hour for the brand to get legitimately red hot. After one last shot for luck, he braced himself up against the back deck. I gloved up in some heat-resistant gear and lined up the brand ready to sear the deed. It was an exhilarating feeling, and I really wasn't anticipating that fact. When I pressed the brand to his skin, I moved quickly and swiftly, because any faltering in my movements would leave scars that would show for life. I let the brand rest there for maybe 3 to 5 seconds once it landed, and pulled it away just as quickly as I had placed it. It all happened so fast, but I was seeing it in slow motion. The smoke rising from his skin. The sizzling sound reminded me of bacon on a Sunday morning. Honestly, it kind of smelt the same too. I didn't hate it. Actually, I loved it. I'm 31 now, and in the years since, it healed alright, but has admittedly faded over time. It's never perfect the first time, but that was by no means the last time I branded someone. I have had countless people ask me to brand them, and even got into the hobby of fabricating personalized brands. People who have paid for my services describe their fascination with branding the same as those who get tattoos, piercings, or scarification. It is a form of art on the body. Their body is my canvas, and I am happy to be the artist that decorates them. I am equally addicted to the art of branding as those who ask me to do so. As we are all well aware, COVID-19, also known as coronavirus, hit this year. This put a massive hit in my branding business, so much so that the last client I had was in September of 2019. By April of this year, 2020, I had the itch to produce another brand so bad that I felt like ripping my hair out. In the fashion of social distancing, I had picked up the habit of daily walks to avoid the cabin fever. I had a few different locations I would frequent, and one of them was the local cemetery. It was always silent and solitary, and I liked it. Once, when I was walking through the cemetery, I noticed a funeral in progress and kept my respectful distance. As I was leaving to head back home was when the thought of the cemetery occurred to me. The cemetery. It's full of fresh-ish bodies that were ripe for the branding. It's not like anyone would ever see them again. They'd just go back in the ground when I was done with them. I hatched a plan. I waited until around 3:30 in the morning to head back to the cemetery. Just enough time for the drunks to be off the road. So easy for me to avoid the cops, and just a little too early for the morning workers to have headed out. Incognito at best. I go to work, and was able to dig through the fresh dirt to the body underneath fairly quickly since it wasn't even fully buried yet. While I was busy digging away, I had set a handheld blowtorch aflame to set the blades aglow on what was now my signature brand. Literally, it was my signature as a brand. Finally, I reached the coffin and cracked the lid. I almost felt bad, but it was too perfect. I just couldn't pass this up. I gently lifted their shirt. I gently lifted the brand. I quickly turned off the torch, and I just as quickly pressed the brand to the corpse's skin. The sizzle, the smoke, the adrenaline all rushed back to me, and it was glorious. I continued this pattern of behavior for a few months. I would scout the local cemeteries for new burials each day on my walks, and then at night I would make my night runs to brand and dash. I had decided to exclusively use my signature brand. It was sad. I had created the brand in October of 2019, hoping to really kickstart my business taking off. But because of the Rona, I had yet to be able to use it. Now, I was getting to use it over and over and leave my mark everywhere. My body count was up to 13. A major problem arose this past week. I was doing my daily scouting when I saw a person approaching me from the opposite direction. The first thing that tipped me off that there was a problem is that the person wasn't wearing a face mask. It's also late October in upstate Ohio, and the person was also wearing a dress. As they drew closer, they pulled out a pair of scissors from seemingly nowhere, cut a slit into the dress where their stomach was, and it hit me like a nuclear bomb. My signature was on their stomach. This was not possible. No living person had that brand. I had only used it on the dead. The next day, there were 2 people who walked past exposing my brand. The day after that, it was 4. I recognized their faces. I couldn't look them in the face. They never approached me or attempted to interact with me in any way, but they also made sure to show me my brand, regardless of where I had placed it on their person. I stopped scouting that day, and I haven't returned to the cemetery since. The next night, I heard banging at my door for a few hours. I was terrified to see what it was. I never left my bed. Yesterday, the banging lasted all day and all night. I sat stone still on my couch, eyes not leaving the television, hoping that eventually I would wake up and all my terrible deeds and everything resulted from it would turn out to just be a dream. Now we've arrived at today's events. Just before dawn, the banging on my door began. Suddenly, the door burst open and they rushed in. All 13 of the deceased whom I had branded made their way into my door, brands and torches in their hands. There was a large struggle between them and I. But I've been chained by the ankles to this steel metal chair since morning. It's dark outside now. It has been dark for a long time. The chair has slowly been heating up, and it's starting to get uncomfortable. But I can't get up. They have all taken turns, one by one, emblazing me with their own personal brands. I don't know how long I'll be here. I don't know how many times I will be branded. I don't even think I'm recognizable at this point. What goes around comes around, I guess. As a college freshman, I had planned to come home for Thanksgiving. I had 2 younger siblings, Grace, who was in the 6th grade, and Liam, who was in the 8th grade, so I knew my parents were always busy, and I would only call them once a week. I am the older sister, being that I'm 18 years old. I had called my parents the previous Thursday to let them know that I would be home the following Thursday, which would be Thanksgiving Day around 10 a.m. Thursday came and I left Penn State main campus at around 7 a.m. to be home in Philadelphia at around 10 a.m. When I got home, I was expecting to be greeted by my annoying younger siblings. But instead, there was dead silence and a note on the dining room table that said, "Dear Alice, your father and I decided to move with your brother and sister to Florida. You can come and go from the house anytime you want, because we have no plans on selling the house. Love, Mom." I felt like I was punched in the stomach. I immediately called my mother, and heard the generic voice message where, sorry, but the phone number you're trying to reach is no longer in service. Goodbye. I then called my father and received the same message. I was confused and perplexed. I felt completely abandoned. I called my Aunt Reba, and she apologized to me and said her sister, who was my mother, gave her very little details other than they wanted to start over in Florida, and they didn't leave an address. I've never heard anything like this before. My parents weren't mad or anything else at me the last time we talked. I looked throughout the house and it definitely looked like they had moved out with no intentions of coming back. I called the police and about a half hour later a detective had showed up. I told the detective that I came home for Thanksgiving break. There was a brief note that my family moved to Florida and my parents gave me no information on where they moved to or an explanation on why they had moved. The detective asked permission to search the house, which I allowed. The detective said, I searched the house. I found no evidence of a crime. Because of that, there's nothing we can do. I replied, How do you know they weren't kidnapped or killed or something? The detective replied, well, since you have a note with your aunt corroborating the story, what's the crime? On top of that, there's no evidence in the house that a crime occurred. I said, Well, they gave me no notice. No reason why they left. The detective said, You're 18. Their legal obligations towards you is over. Though this situation sounds extremely harsh and a bit cruel, there has been no crime committed. The detective then asked, What about your parents' or your siblings' email or social media accounts? I said, The social media accounts were taken down and I haven't gotten an email response from any of them. My dad has his own IT business, which is almost impossible to track down because he doesn't advertise. The detective said, Well, I hate to say this, but it sounds like your parents wanted to separate from you. Call me if you come across any evidence that would suggest a crime had occurred. The detective had left, and here I am, 18 years old during Thanksgiving, and I'm now completely alone. I look online to try and find similar situations to what is happening to me, and I find nothing. Also, I have to assume that I'm going to be completely cut off financially. I'm going to have to get a full-time job, but at least my loans will keep me in college. I'll transfer to one of the branch campuses to make it easier to find a job, and it would be a bit cheaper living in this house versus paying rent. I asked my neighbor if they had seen or heard anything. My neighbor replied, Yeah, there was a big unmarked truck that came, with guys who were putting stuff from your house into the truck. I thought your parents were doing fall cleaning and donating old stuff away. I hadn't seen either of your parents since last week. I thought to myself, whoever those movers were knew not to take any of my stuff, which my parents or someone else had to tell them. I thought through these events that had transpired to see if there was anything I had missed. I called my brother and sister's school district, and the principal said the receptionist received a phone call from a person who identified herself as my siblings' mother, who said they were moving to Florida, where my siblings were going to be homeschooled. I thought to myself, either the detective was right, where my parents wanted to completely disassociate from me, or this is a very carefully orchestrated crime. My mother hadn't worked in months, so I couldn't question her employer. I always thought my father's job was boring, and I never really paid attention to who his clients were, so I don't know who to contact regarding my father. I'm now completely out of thoughts on what to do or what avenues I should pursue. I went back to the main campus to finish the semester. I got a part-time job at the university and a part-time job at the bar. I would check my emails constantly, and still no response from any of my family members. My parents had paid off the mortgage, so I would just have to pay the utilities and the taxes. It's now December, and the fall semester had finished. I drove back to Philadelphia with a car which probably wouldn't last much longer. My parents' house was in the desirable historic district whose property value had skyrocketed over the years. The area was also prone to break-ins, so I always felt weary about sleeping in the house alone. Being a female, it was extremely creepy going into my parents' house with no one else being there. I unpacked all of my things from college. I was hoping that one of my friends would move in with me and pay rent. As nighttime approached, the quietness of the house became more and more creepy. It's now 2 a.m. and I'm upstairs in my room playing with my phone because I can't sleep. I hear an unsettling sound from downstairs. I swore I heard the front door close. Then I heard the most terrifying sounds imaginable. I heard footsteps on the hardwood floors. I became paralyzed in fear. I know I have to do something. I pull myself together and quietly sneak into my closet. I lay down and put the spare sheets and blankets over me. Then I hear a click, clack as the footsteps come up the stairs. I can't see this person, so I don't know who this person is. I try to hold my breath so whoever this unknown person is can't hear me. My heart jumps out of my chest as the unknown person walks towards the closet door. The door opens, and I stay as still as a tree. The unknown person then turns and walks away. Then the person does a quick look through the other rooms upstairs, and then proceeds to leave the house. After hyperventilating, I call the police. They take down my statement and kind of brush me off, because whoever came into the house most likely had a key, because there were no signs of forced entry, and there was also nothing taken from the house. I had to go to Home Depot in the morning and change out all the locks. It took me forever, and I spent money I really didn't have, but at least I felt safer now. The odd thing is whoever the person was probably had a key, and the person went straight to my room. If it was one of my family members, I would think they would see my car and at least call out my name. I had to suspect that the unknown person who was in the house was there to harm me, which made me all the more terrified of being in the house alone. I went the next day to the ASPCA to adopt a dog. I now felt a little better with having Buster in the house. I would hope he would at least bark to scare the intruder away. I wish I knew where in Florida my parents moved. It's such a big state that it would be like looking for a needle in a haystack without knowing at least the city. Everything is just so weird. First, my parents abandoned me, and now someone might be looking to harm me. I couldn't rule out that something sinister happened to my family, but someone would have to know the passwords to their social media accounts to be able to disable them, as well as the other personal information. But why? Was the question I kept asking myself. Why would someone want to harm my parents? Or why would my parents abandon me? Either question was plausible, and I'm not sure which one I preferred more, of either being abandoned or that someone harmed them. My Aunt Reba was the only family I had left. I would visit her about once a week. I tried to brainstorm with her all the possibilities of what was going on. I'm also not completely naive. The only person who is not a suspect is me if something did happen to my family. But what would the motive be? Then it dawned on me. How could I be so stupid? My parents' house is worth $500,000, which is a hell of a return on an investment considering they only spent $30,000 for it. If I'm dead, then someone could lay claim to the house. I thought it was odd how my Aunt Reba doesn't reach out to me unless I make the effort, and she never told me about my parents moving until I approached her. But what would be her motive? She has no kids. She's a retired school teacher, so she has a pension and she has a house that's as equally as valuable as my parents. Logically, she would be able to figure out all my parents' passwords, which more than likely my mother probably inadvertently told Reba over the year. She also has a key to my parents' house. I'm now convinced that my aunt is responsible for my parents' disappearance, and now it's time to catch the rat. Jealousy and greed were the only motives that I could think of why Reba killed my family. With the new locks, I gave Reba a spare to the house. One of my old shady boyfriends lent me his stolen handgun. First, I want to approach Reba and let her know that I was aware of her scheme and she needed to tell me where my parents' bodies are buried. So I went to Reba's house. I left my gun at home. She answered the door and I said, "I know it was you. You killed my parents." She replied, "Dear, I would never hurt anyone on top of killing my own sister and her kids." I said, "Don't play games. You are the only logical person. Tell me what you did to my family, and I'll give you time to leave before I call the cops." She said, "Dear, please leave now. Those are some serious allegations you're alleging." I said, "Fine, but eventually I'll figure out what you did to my family." Then I left. Christmas is only 2 days away, and I have never felt so depressed and lonely. I try to fall asleep, but I can't. As I start to doze off, once again I hear that terrifying sound of someone coming through the front door. I'm as equally as scared as the last time this happened. I grab my gun and hide in the closet. I'm an 18-year-old girl who's never harmed anyone. I don't know if it's my aunt, one of her goons, or someone else. I hear the click-clack sounds of steps coming up the stairs. I am now shaking in terror in the closet. I hear the footsteps come to my room, then towards the closet. I have the gun pointed at the closet door. As the footsteps approach the closet door, I unload 6 shots and yell out in pure horror. Then I hear a big thump, and I cautiously open the door. It's my aunt. I see that one of the bullets hit her in the forehead. I feel a sense of relief and a sense of sadness. I'm now hysterically crying in a fetal position on the floor. I think to myself, 2 months ago, I was just an ordinary freshman. Now my family is presumed dead, and I just killed my aunt, who is probably their killer. I call the police, and the coroner comes and takes my dead aunt away. I'm questioned down at the police precinct. The police aren't as understanding as I thought they would be. I told them all of the circumstantial evidence I had against my aunt. The police questioned why I gave my aunt a key, and also that my aunt had no weapons on her when I shot her. Also, there was no proof that my family is dead or that my aunt had anything to do with their disappearance. I left the police station, and I was told that I would have to meet with the Attorney General for further questioning and possible charges. I went to my parents' house and fell asleep on the couch from pure exhaustion. It's Christmas Eve, and I'm extremely depressed. I doze off into a deep sleep, and I'm awakened by knocks on the front door. I figure it's the police, so I open the door. As I open the door, I see my parents. Then everything goes blank. I wake up on the couch with my family hovering over me. I must have fainted, I thought to myself. Then I say, "Mom, Dad, Grace, Liam, am I dreaming?" My mother says, "No, honey, it's us." Then I say, "Where were you guys? What happened?" My mother responded, Well, we decided that we had enough of everything in Philadelphia, so we went to Florida. I said, "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you leave me?" My father said, "Well, honey, we wanted you to grow up. You were too reliant on us for everything." I said, "What? I'm an 18-year-old kid. All of my friends are like me." My father then said, "Compared to me and your mother, when we were your age, our parents had much higher expectations, and we weren't allowed to just be 18-year-old kids." Then I said, "I killed Aunt Reba last night. I thought she had killed you guys." My mom said, "What?" And then she broke down and started crying. My father said, "Oh my God, what did you do? Why?" Then I started to cry hysterically and I couldn't talk anymore. My parents moved back to Philadelphia. The district attorney offered me a plea deal for killing my aunt. I would have to spend at least a year in prison and spend 10 years on parole. I accepted the deal, and I was expected to report to prison on January 2nd. I thought to myself it was like I made a deal with the devil in exchange for getting my family back. Prison was as miserable as I thought it would be, but at least my family visited me once a week. I have served 6 months so far, and it feels like 20 years. At least my parents were visiting today, I thought. I was happy to see my parents. As backwards as their parenting style is, at least I had them. We were finishing up our meeting, and my mother said, "Sorry, dear, we're not going to be able to visit you for a while." Then my mother said, "Well, with the money we got from your aunt's house, we're going to travel the country." Then it hit me. My head started to spin, like I was in a different galaxy. I regained my senses and said, "You fucking snakes! You planned this from the very beginning. You lined everything up to make me think Aunt Reba killed you guys for your house. But instead, you set me up to kill her. You gutless, rotten snakes! I hate the both of you!" Then they both facetiously grinned at me, and my mother said, "Goodbye, dear." At first, it was fun. I enjoyed the game that was being played with my body. When they first swept me away from my little room in rural South Dakota, I may have been a little frightened. Who wouldn't be? But then, as always, fear of the unknown can give way to unexpected pleasure. And when you live in a small town where it's difficult to find a guy willing to even use a pinky finger, a guy can get desperate. That first night was a little freaky, I won't lie. I remember being lifted from my bed and an incredibly bright light waking me up. There was a pulling sensation from my solar plexus, and I was completely unable to move. My limbs and head splayed as my body slowly rose into the air. My heart was racing, and I thought, "Oh Lord, here we go. This is it. I've become a redneck stereotype." I'm still not sure how I got through the window without breaking it. I blacked out for a small amount of time. It could have been from the shock, or it could have been that they knocked me out. They aren't the most graceful when it comes to stuff like that. But when I awoke, I was butt naked, my arms were restrained above my head, and my legs were tied to two strange glowing things on the floor. I was suspended, my body pitched slightly forward, completely vulnerable to any intruders, if you get my meaning. Honestly, I was in a position I had always dreamed about, and I was kind of excited. That fear of being completely out of control and dying was giving me a halfie, and I tried to relax. But there was no chance of that with what followed. 2 of them entered the area I was hanging in. The sight of them was so shocking I couldn't even find my voice to scream. One of them had a tray that had an assortment of strange cylindrical devices. The tray was metal. No, not quite metal. It had a weird texture, like brick, but the color of mercury. I don't know why that tray sticks out to me when it's the implements I should have been focusing on. I mean, I eventually did. I didn't have a choice, but that tray, it spoke to my soul. Anyway, while the first one was setting up the tray next to me, the second one began to fondle my body with their tentacles. Now, I tell you, my halfie turned straight into the Chrysler building. The tentacles caressed my skin all over. There was this slime that they had. But it wasn't sticky, it was gooey, more like pudding. But the feeling of that and the tentacles made my skin break out into goosebumps. A part of me thought I should have been frightened into apoplexy, but when a boy's been alone for so long, he'll take any attention he can get. I might have orgasmed at some point, but I don't remember. I know I was covered head to toe in their goo. But it was kind of comforting also. After what seemed like hours of being manhandled by those glorious greenish-blue tentacles, the other one finished whatever preparation they were doing and joined the first one in slithering across my body. Now, when I say tentacles, I mean tentacles, like those one you see octopuses have on those nature shows or in aquariums. Except they only have 2 like our arms, and these ones have suction cups all over, not just on the bottom. In fact, you can still see some dark red hickeys on my body from their fondling. They make me proud, if you must know. There's something about being wanted that fulfills me. So, I'm getting felt up like a dollar bill in a strip club when the first one stopped and grabbed one of the implements from the tray. I only caught a glimpse of what they were doing because my eyes were practically rolled up inside my head, but I noticed they grabbed the smaller tube. It was about 5 inches and about as thick as the top of a Coke bottle. Not a plastic one, but one of the old-timey glass bottles. The implement was smooth and pink with a little light glowing just under the surface. I didn't have much time to consider what was happening any further due to the fact that it was soon inserted into my anus. At first, there was a little pressure and pain as it worked against my tight sphincter, but they were kind enough to coat the probe with some of their slime before slipping the little pink bugger inside me. I tell you, my mind exploded. In a good way. You know, living alone in the middle of a field where the nearest bar is about 45 minutes away, I'd experiment, of course. I'd use the objects you'd think. Carrots, parsnips. Sometimes if I was feeling particularly frisky, I'd see how far I could get with a small cucumber. But none of that compared to the warm tingle that erupted across every inch of my alien goose-soaked body as the probe slowly went deeper into my cavity. I was in love. I'm not kidding either. I felt so much love for those 2 creatures as they continued to stroke my body. No one had made me feel so complete. I know I orgasmed that time. I think they may have collected the result for study. Soon after that, they removed the exploratory device from inside me and conked me out again. When I woke up, I was ass up in cornfield down the street from my house. A skunk staring at me. Part of me was a little sad thinking they had finished with me and that I wouldn't see them again. But I was happily wrong. It was about a week before they came for me again. The second time was very much like the first time, except I think it was a different creature. I could tell they weren't the same as before because the texture of their slime felt a little bit different. I didn't mind, though. Knowing that I was wanted and needed made me feel like a new boy. The device was a little thicker this time, but I opened up easily and accepted. And so it went for a couple months. Luckily, the visits became more and more frequent and the probes became bigger and bigger. I'd never felt more in love in my entire life. I soon got to figuring out who was titillating me and when. They were always gentle, and I could tell they cared about me. It had to be about the 50th time they came for me. I kept a calendar above my headboard where I'd mark off the dates they came for me, when something unfortunate happened. We had finished up that night with a particularly large probe. I've never been certain what information they were trying to get out of me, but we'd worked up to the largest device yet. It was about 12 inches in length and about the thickness of my wrist. Now, mind you, I have skinny wrists, but they're thick for inserting into a butthole. As always, it felt exquisite going in, but it seems my body was unable to keep with our sexual calisthenics. Upon removal, it seemed more came out than intended. I heard a slurp and a slap, and looked down to see my large intestine on the ground between my legs. My small intestine was following close behind. I had, according to some internet research, prolapsed. Now I was feeling high from the night's orgasm, and it felt better than I'd ever felt before, so I wasn't quite sure how to react. I just stared at the pile of guts that lay there. My lovers seemed quite concerned and quickly moved into action. I think I was still smiling like a fool as they put me under. When I came to, I was still naked and lying on a slab. None of my lovers were around, and I thought it odd they didn't replace me back home like they normally did. It took me a moment to remember what had happened, and I quickly used my fingers to explore my back door. There was a cool metallic feeling where my hole had been. When I pressed down on my torso, there was a hard feeling like my insides were replaced by mechanical parts. I smiled. My lovers loved me so much they gave me a bionic butthole. It was that moment that an idea entered my pretty head. I slowly moved off the operating slab and exited the door to the room. There was a hallway with a few doors. Seems basic architecture is universal. I began to explore the ship. The first room I entered had exactly what I needed, an armory. There were a few laser beam guns hanging from the wall, and I took them. That's when I made my way here, to what seems like the navigation room or something. Y'all have to understand that it is with love that I hold this gun to your head and force you to your knees. You see, there will be no returning me to my house. We've been together for several months, and I love all of you. Every single one of you. And I know you all love me. I love exploring our love together. You fulfill me more than any garden vegetable ever could. I'm pretty sure you can understand the words I'm saying. You are more advanced than I am. It's time to take this relationship to the next level. You see, you gave me the greatest gift of eternal pleasure, and I realized that with this new metal butthole, I can take over the universe. All the probing, all the manhandling, it all led to this moment. Our love will conquer all. There is nothing that can stand in our way. But you have to understand, I'm in charge now. I'm your leader. And because of that, you have to understand that from now on, it's my way or the highway. When are you going to leave your wife? My mistress asked. I was putting on my boots. Soon, I said. On my way home, I swung by the office to pick up a new golf club I'd had delivered, then stopped by the daycare to pick up my son. That's when I saw the first wasp. I assumed it had entered the car on my son's clothes. It was particularly pesky, eluding my attempts to flush it out the windows until I had no choice but to pull over and hunt it down with a rolled-up business magazine. A hunt that ended with a very satisfying splat. The next one appeared a few days later while I was pretending to watch TV, followed by a second and third, and all three buzzed so loud I couldn't concentrate on my sexting. I had to take a break and kill them. Splat. Dozens more materialized the following week. By now I was certain we had an infestation, but my wife insisted she hadn't seen any and my son was too young to talk. I called an exterminator. The house is clean, he said after his inspection. But it wasn't. The wasps continued to show up, day after day, in even greater numbers. Any time I was home, they buzzed relentlessly. I stopped being able to sleep. I stopped being able to concentrate. The only time I felt any peace from them was at work, where my boss increasingly micromanaged me. And in the hotel, my mistress had stepped up her nagging. It's almost been a year. Are you going to leave your wife or not? One day, I could barely take it anymore and had to use every ounce of my self-control not to slap her across the face. When my son is a little older, I said through clenched teeth. On my wife's birthday, my wife and I took turns hiding from our son in a game of hide and seek. I hid in our shed. It was dark inside, and when the buzzing started, I suddenly felt the wasps all around me, crawling on my face and limbs. As I lurched for the exit, I felt as if I were passing through an entire atmosphere of them. I imagined them flying down my throat, devouring my eyes, numbing my tongue. I screamed, and my wife had to calm me down. "It's okay, there aren't any more wasps," she repeated as she petted my hair like I was a dumb dog. I took a sabbatical from work. Because I was home all day, we canceled daycare. I checked the house incessantly for the wasp lair. I knew there was one because I had already killed thousands. That's when I saw it. My son sleeping so peacefully as a wasp exited his nostril. Another emerged from his ear. I knew what had to be done. What I had to do. Wasps buzzed. Phone buzzed. I grabbed my golf club. Splat. So far, my senior year at Doherty High was both unexciting and uninspired. 2 months in and I was still single. No friends for homecoming, never mind a real date for that matter. I was still a rebel without a cause. High school hell, the latest shitty chapter in my young life. My only real friend was my brother Danny. He was 15, younger and less smarter than me. Not to mention shorter and skinnier. But I always looked after him. Some would say my protective nature was the product of growing up in a single-parent household. But for me, it was just love. Of course, Mom did what she could. Being a teacher meant long hours for half-assed pay, but hey, we lived in a nice slice of suburbia here in Albany, Georgia. Certainly in an area much safer than the rest of this troubled city. The houses aligned next to each other, no fences or huge yards between us. The houses conforming to the same bland brick structure. Sadly, there weren't many kids our age out here. Never mind a hot guy. Our next-door neighbors were Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell, a younger couple with no kids. They were polite and pretty, each of them with dark hair and piercing green eyes. I gotta say, Mr. Caldwell's nice physique didn't go unnoticed by me during his daily jogs. But still, shit was pretty boring. Danny and I could only hope Halloween would be better. At our age, we had no plans for trick-or-treating. Obviously, no invites to any parties. Instead, Danny and I just rode around Albany, my Halloween playlist our companion. From 5 to midnight, we cruised the streets, from MJ's Thriller to Travis's Sicko Mode. There was green and celebration. This high and all the Halloween hijinks were a blast. And with Mom out of town, there was no curfew. None she had to know about, at least. Technically, we reached November 1, but Halloween was still everywhere, man. The atmosphere all around us. Not to mention we had a Michael Myers marathon to catch up back at the house. One aided by leftover pot and those bottles of red Mom kept hidden in the cabinets. Only issue was I got hungry. This girl had to eat and the munchies weren't helping. I pulled into the driveway, pushed the long bangs away from my glasses as I faced Danny. "Well, happy Halloween, kiddo." "Hell yeah," Danny chuckled. Outside, a cold wind swept through my Nirvana tea and slight stomach. Next to me, I saw my stoned brother shivering, his good looks and dimples disrupted by the October chills. "Shit, Candace, it's cold. It's Halloween, dumbass," I teased. For the 20th time tonight, my stomach growled. "God, I'm so hungry." Together, we stumbled up to the front door, our sloppy footsteps aligned and in sync. The security light seemed dimmer than usual. For once, the garage door was closed. But that didn't stop us. I grabbed the doorknob. A shock hit me, not from a scare, but surprise that this bad boy was left unlocked. "Shit," I said. Turning, I got greeted by Danny's beaming eyes, his excited expression. "What?" He smirked. I chuckled. "I told your ass to lock it." "I did. I know I did." Shaking my head, I pushed the door open slowly, keeping the creaking to a minimum. "Obviously not. Maybe Mom's home." Danny's paranoid gaze drifted over to the garage. He actually had a point, I realized. Mom did say they might get back late Halloween night. So much for escaping that curfew. I think you're right. I held the door open and saw a long, dark entryway awaiting us. I faced Danny. So, just be quiet, all right? Okay, said Danny's defensive tone. Like an angry teacher, I leaned in closer, my whisper bursting at the seams. I mean it. We stepped inside, escaping the night to enter an even darker abyss. The floor felt unfamiliar, but we traveled onward too, drunk and too stoned to turn back now. But seeing all the picture frames in the shadows reassured me. Mom always cherished those memories after all. Once we stumbled past the living room and our large flat screen, I knew we were safe and sound. The kitchen was only a few feet away. Excited, I rushed ahead of Danny and hit the lights. Through the blurred buzz, I somehow made out the towering fridge and towering pantry door. Our journey was over. For me, anyway. What are we gonna make? Danny asked. Don't ask me why, but I always craved breakfast food at 1 a.m. Sausage specifically. So after a quick sloppy search in what we careened through the cabinets, dived through the freezer and closet, we finally had our materials. I got to work with Danny by my side. His own Halloween playlist at a comfortable volume, these first few minutes were fun. Joyful. The midnight breakfast started cooking, simmering. Savoring the holiday spirit, I smiled at Danny. Which one do you want to watch first? He smirked and leaned against the table. I noticed a few plates at his fingertips. Mom must have had the same idea we did. Let me guess. You're gonna make us watch the old Halloween, that 80s one. 1978, I teased. I turned my attention back to the food, but we can watch the new one if... A brutal thud erupted. Not the sound of a fallen flower pot or clumsy collapse. I'm talking a heavy drop. The thunderous thud came straight from a hallway in the corner, the one leading to our bedrooms. Danny and I stood still, scared shitless. But there was nothing else. No words, no movement. Just a hypnotic riff from the animal's house of the rising sun. A shiver ran up and down my spine there in the cold. Call it sisterly instinct, but I knew Danny wasn't in much better shape. What the hell was that? Danny whispered. Snapping out of his fright, he killed the music. I don't know. With cautious steps, I approached the hallway, until Danny snatched my shoulder. Candace, what the hell are you doing? I hesitated. He made a point after all. In a sudden epiphany, I now emphasized with all those horror movie victims we made fun of. The power of booze and recreational drugs definitely damaged their decision-making, including mine. But what about Mom? Mom might have fell, I said to him. Now it was Danny's turn to give pause. I grabbed a hold of his hand. Come, let's go look. I forced a smile. Paranoid ass. So are you, he said. We staggered out of the kitchen, back into the blackness. Stifling silence surrounded us. Upon entering the hall, we stopped, a breather we both needed. Through the tension, my heart pounded. Just think of Mom. It's just her. Mom! I heard Danny shout. God damn it, Danny. I flashed him a quick glare, one he couldn't see in the darkness. Mom, is that you? Danny continued. Then we heard a frenetic slam. A narrow ray of light fell out, spreading across our terrified faces. The last door on the right was open. Danny clenched tighter to my hand. That's her, right? Fighting the fear, I looked all around the hall, but the light wasn't enough. All I could see was Mom's museum of photographs. All the outlines, that is. There's no reason to be scared, I reminded myself. You're home. Come on, I reassured him. I led the charge, getting closer and closer to the back, to our mother's bedroom. The room was a furnace, stuffy, cluttered, more uncomfortable than the dread I still felt. Only a single bedside lamp was on, several magazines piled up beside it. Probably Mom's people's, I figured. The closet door in the back completely closed. Before Danny could say anything, I pulled him further within, past the tall dresser, the heavy clumps of what appeared to be Mama's clothes littering the floor like visible landmines. Up ahead, I saw the sheets pulled tight. At least she hadn't fallen out of bed. "Mom," I finally said. Danny and I came to a stop. Then I heard Danny scream. I wanted to match him, but the fear kept a strange hold on me, crushing my soul and voice, holding me hostage to this horror. In bed wasn't Mom, but a couple. A college-aged man and woman I'd never seen before, both of them nude and beautiful. Neither of them able to finish their degrees now. Not when the man's throat was slit ear to ear in one jacket line, so much blood coating his smooth brown skin. The lady in no better shape, her corpse covered in deep cuts and punctures from an array of knives, her disembodied blue eyes placed closer to her breasts for a sickening display of humor. "What the fuck?" I struggled to say. The room felt more humid, Danny and I both feeling more fear. But I couldn't turn away. My gaze strayed to the end of the sheets. There was blood soaking all through the fabric, but at the base of the bed was another large bump hidden beneath the blanket. Undoubtedly, another body. The closet door burst open. Danny and I looked straight toward the back, the lamp a dim spotlight for a tall man standing there, breathing heavy, a butcher knife held in his gloved hand. There were black robes over his body, a rubber alien mask over his face. The yellow mask highlighted by big bug eyes. I couldn't see much more, but this was enough to disturb us. Enough to send us running the other way. We hit the hallway, slipping and stumbling around, our Halloween heads too full of booze and green. Behind us, fast footsteps blared through the dead silence. The man was coming after us. The sisterly concern turned into motherly panic. I wrapped an arm around Danny, pulling him closer. "Run!" A sliding screech trailed us, the sound of a blade tracing along our walls, its violent wail so unsettling. "Shit!" I cried. We were halfway home, almost to the kitchen when the overhead lights cut on. Stage fright joined our terror. Immediately, Danny and I froze. Bright lights illuminated the framed photos. None of them were ours. No sign of me, no Danny, no Mom. Instead, they documented an attractive young couple and their beautiful marriage. The Caldwells. Their wedding photos stared back at me, their smiles so beautiful. But where the hell were they now? "We went to the wrong house," Danny said. I'd laugh if the scares weren't real, but what could have been a fun drunk story had turned into a nightmare. Once I looked toward the kitchen, another figure greeted me. Frankenstein's monster himself. Or herself. The boobs gave it away. Like the alien, she too wore black robes and held a butcher knife, only hers were dripping fresh red blood. Unable to hide the shivers, I did my best to play it cool, especially in front of my little brother. "Who are you?" I hurled at the woman. Moving with methodical slowness, she reached up and raised her mask, just enough for a face reveal. Behind me, I heard the man's manic chuckles. I recognized him without even turning around. There stood Mrs. Caldwell in front of us, her husband, the alien. Both of them stone-cold killers, straight-up fucking psychos. With Danny trembling, I couldn't show fear. I forced myself to stay poised, staying tall. Maybe I had liquid courage at this point, or something else, an inner fire that buzzed too strong to go away. "Looks like y'all broke into the wrong house," Mrs. Caldwell teased behind a green-eyed glare. "Indeed," her husband added. Yelling, I pulled Danny and charged forward. The sudden move startled the couple. Mr. Caldwell cried out. Mrs. Caldwell had no chance at swinging that knife as I pushed her out of the way. "Get that bitch!" she screamed. We ran into the kitchen, the lighting brighter than ever. Fresh oven flames highlighted our horror. Smoke hit us, but not the kind we wanted. God Damn it, I coughed. Go, Danny yelled. As we started to go through the sausage fog, a hand reached out and snagged my shoulder. A killer's touch. I got you, you little bitch, Mrs. Caldwell said, her voice muffled behind the mask. She held me in place. I couldn't move. I couldn't escape. Come on, Candace, Danny cried. I'm trying, I said. Now I heard the husband storm into the kitchen, felt Mrs. Caldwell pull me in closer. A shrill siren rang out, the sound blaring over and over in a nauseous rhythm, a roar stolen from the world's most soulless prison. The noise destroyed my ears, but at least it had the same effect on everyone else. Yelling, Mrs. Caldwell let go and fell back against the counter. I heard the husband's startled scream even over that damn smoke alarm, a state-of-the-art one at that. The gizmo only going unnoticed all along due to Danny and I's super stupor. Let's go, Danny yelled. I grabbed his arm and led the way again, straight out of our neighbor's house. Along the way, I didn't hear the killers closing in on us. The one good thing about that fucking alarm was it drowned everything out. Finally, I threw the front door open and we ran out into the November cold. Danny and I's exit from this suburban, uncanny valley complete, seemingly. Hold it right there, barked a voice by our car. A flashlight froze us, a chubby cop holding it. His police car had us blocked in. Apparently, he'd responded to the alarm. The fire truck was well on its way till the Caldwells arrived, still in costume, but their masks raised. Innocent enough on this holiday. Danny and I jumped back, but there wasn't much else we could do when the cop car was right there, when we were literally held at gunpoint. Wait, it's all a misunderstanding, Mrs. Caldwell smooth-talked the cop. She shrugged, no longer holding that knife. The fire's out now. At her command, the officer raised a walkie-talkie. No fire truck needed. We're clear. Listen, they're murderers, I told the officer. I pointed at the house. There's bodies inside. Yeah, they killed them, my brother chimed in. The cop's glower fixated on us. And who are you two exactly? We hesitated. Danny too scared to speak, and me, well, what was I gonna say? We live next door, I started. So what you two been doing, huh? The cop further prodded. He leaned in closer, all too familiar with what I'm sure we smelled like. Y'all been smoking a little? It's okay, officer, Mrs. Caldwell said. Immediately, the cop turned his attention toward the couple. Ma'am, did they give y'all any problems? Mrs. Caldwell gave us a dismissive wave. They just broke in, that's all. Broke in? It's nothing serious. Her grin stared me down. None at all, Mr. Caldwell said. They had us. I knew that much. And given their sly smiles, they were happy about it. Relieved to have a cop on their side. Next to me, Danny just took my lead. We knew the drill at this point. Do y'all want to press any charges, ma'am? The cop asked Mrs. Caldwell. That cold-blooded serial killer bitch. She looked right at me. Not at all. She gave me a cryptic wink. One final Halloween scare.